we're just fine with that. Do y'all want to come type your email?
Yeah.
Yeah, but it's because it's attached to that. Like hours Okay, I just have to change. Okay, so just keep checking.
I got the email chain, by the way.
Yeah, I got the
Yeah.
Alex and I negate our sole contention is the genie is already out of the bottle. Biometric data use has grown over the years. As Jackson 23 quantifies, the Homeland Advanced Recognition System already contains biometric data for over 250 million people. That number is expected to rise as the industry is projected to hit 45 billion by 2024. As a result, AI21 notes 170 plus organizations have came together to call for an outright ban on uses of biometric recognition technologies that enable mass surveillance. The support also exists among lawmakers as evident by the 2021 and 2023 ban proposals introduced by Sanders and Warren. While the solution is well-intended, Douglas 20 explains a ban on biometrics is implausible because the genie is already out of the bottle, so a ban only halts the system instead of correcting it. Ending the system with a ban creates huge opportunity costs. For instance, ITIF writes that when law enforcement obtains biometric evidence from a crime scene, it can help narrow down a pool of suspects. Accordingly, 1021 notes biometrics help city reduce crime by 40% and reduce emergency response times by 35%. Mets 22 writes the outcomes are corroborated by New Orleans and Virginia's decision to overturn a biometric ban after imposing it in 2021. Sabas 22 quantifies homicides in New Orleans were up 141% without biometrics in contrast to 2019 when biometrics were still in use. Fortunately, regulations maintains these benefits and drastically mitigates biometric pitfalls in two ways. First is deterrence. The ACLU finds in 2008, Illinois enacted a law called BIPA that required entities who use, collect, or store biometric data to receive prior written consent and refrain from selling or profiting from biometric data. Larson 22 explains under BIPA, individuals may recover actual damages or liquidated damages of $1,000 up to $5,000 per violation. This provision hasn't gone unnoticed, as Wiesner 22 quantifies nearly 2,000 lawsuits alleging violations of BIPA have been filed since 2017, yielding a series of massive settlements and judgments. Given the number of successful settlements, Holland 22 concludes out of litigatory fear, companies are reconsidering biometric tech and its implementation. The second way regulation corrects biometric pitfalls is through an increase in visibility. With biometric recognition, a warrant would be necessary precursor to biometric database access. Claypool 20 explains, just like everything else, to access biometric data, the officer must show they reasonably suspect that a person has committed a crime. Only then will the officer be issued a warrant that allows intrusion on private information. This prevents law enforcement from searching everyone and stops indiscriminate behavior. A wave of these proposals have already hit the country, as Lively 21 finds in Virginia and Pennsylvania, prior legislative approval is required to deploy facial recognition technology. Due to the prospect of these results, lawmakers have proposed the Online Data Federal Privacy Act, a federal regulation bill for biometrics. The likelihood of this or similar legislation getting passed is high, as Goff 23 finds, unlike years past, 2023 is a tipping point for biometric regulation as people realize that tech companies policing themselves isn't a good option. Therefore, the impact is income inequality. Answer 20 finds crime rate to be an often determinant of income inequality because of its impact on economic productivity. Encyclopedia 19 explains communities with high crime rates are affected through loss of tourism and retail sales. To date, estimates the annual cost of crime reached 1.7 trillion. Problematically, income inequality dampens investment and growth because Vieira 22 explains it results in a prioritization of private over public investment, namely health and education, which negatively affects growth. Viven 17 quantifies rising inequality as slowed GDP by 4% in recent years. Critically, Norris 15 writes the economic trade-offs that are made in an inequitable society hurt poverty reduction efforts. As the Center on Poverty in 2018 wrote that the real household income for the bottom 20% declined by 7% and resulted in a 3.2 million more people living in poverty. Thus, communicating.
Yeah, and then we got just
Let me know what I wrote this.
sweet. I got it.
I got it too.
Roger. Prioritize structural violence. First, some manufacturers destruction of structural violence. These 22 governments have a history of collecting data from civilians to find the loss of privacy for security factors. Have big social demands to detract from structural violence. Rulers hope you won't notice structural violence. If you think there are greater threats to your safety, you have been caught. Second, the traditional recyclers go to address structural violence, particularly likewise, policymakers should look to society's most vulnerable. Fear of catastrophe leads policymakers to battle dramatic but less threatening habit while accepting more harmful but more mundane habits. Indeed, Nixon 11 finds that we need to engage violence in its not spectacular. The invisibility of structural violence it is underrepresented in strategic planning as well as in human memory. And then human law enforcement. History 21 explains undergirding the rise of mass incarceration in America is surveillance of racialized individuals. Law enforcement have mobilized new technologies for police to monitor and contain people of color. Police adopted proactive policing, acquiring technologies for proactive rather than reactive policing in the turn of the 21st century. Law enforcement is in full control. Hence, this mass incarceration functions as a new racial caste system driven by disenfranchisement, destruction, and death. Since the inception of police, law enforcement have characterized colored persons as threats to state security and establish social orders. Thus, biometric functions to increase police power, rendering it more efficient and effective as true goal oppression. ACLU 25 adding technology to a racist system renders it a more efficient tool of oppression. Facial recognition technology is biased, misidentifying black and Asian people 100 times more often than white people who are then misidentified, arrested, and charged for crimes they didn't commit. Worse, after 2018, police often frame facial recognition as a necessary exposure to some of the most heinous crimes. The technology more frequently used for low-level offenses from shoplifting to graffiti. And Lead 22 concludes surveillance enables more precise discrimination as law enforcement impacts marginalized populations. Facial recognition has drastically enlarged the precision and scope of potential surveillance with access to massive amounts of data. Those devastation. EPA 15 finds consequences of mass incarceration are denying child custody, voting rights, employment, low license, student aid, and public housing, and deportation, creating a permanent second-class status for millions of Americans. Convention to state control. Nowadays, black activism. Despite the emergence of many social justice movements in the U.S. have begun to fail. Wisely, you find that our protests are failing with Black Lives Matter, never achieving their objectives. Today, protests are ineffective and do not result in change. Biometrics are fueling their downfall. Policy 33 finds police use surveillance to track protesters, waiting for them to engage in any conduct that will provide a pretext to arrest them, such as stepping off the sidewalk onto the roadway. Facial recognition allows law enforcement to identify specific demonstrators. The confines of timing must have identified specifically intended demonstration deterred participation. Even if protesters aren't incarcerated, the government punishes them in other ways. The GB 20 of Harvard writes that facial recognition used to identify Black Lives Matter protests were used to deny access to healthcare, welfare, housing, and employment. Down 22 quantifies federal agencies and police departments across the country use facial recognition thousands of times to identify and arrest protesters. Overall, Vader 19 finds that it resulted in a chilling impact on public protests, assembly, and speech. The impact of progressive movements. Race 22 finds Black Lives Matter has shed light on police brutality, shifted public opinion, and ushered in policy changes that include the bias training, body cameras, and bans on no-knock warrants. These reforms are critical. IHME is 21 finds Black Americans experience fatal police violence at a rate 3.5 times higher than white Americans, which consideration legitimizes and reproduces an unequalized racialized social order. Subsequently, gender securitization. Gender surveillance is rising and biometrics are to blame. Constitution confirms algorithmic gender recognition assesses an individual by identifying bodily landmarks. Corporations use existing exists under tailored advertisement and gender app programming that travel and migration have become overwhelmingly managed under through gender encoded biometric data. Overall, biometrics are being used in countless smaller instances that seem benign but collectively reproduce a particular view of gender into our socio-technical fabric. Biometrics definitionally deny self-identification. Perhaps when 11 explains the assumption that the classification of male or female as a permanent feature of the body underlies the rationale for use and identity verification. Ultimately, to corroborate biometrics are predicated in bodies and identity being static because algorithms are encoded with binary gender. Thus, these systems are forced conformity or erasure. Conrad's 09 confirms the transgender body appears contradictory. Data history comprises two bodies, male and female, rather than one gender per body. Rather than abandoning the gender system, predictive text can only reinforce the body's pressure to conform or be excluded. The impact of the erasure of the transgender community. The Duncan Institute's 22 concludes that anti-trans hostility in the U.S. seeks the eradication of trans identity, calling for policies that criminalize trans life. All attempts to further marginalize transgender identities contributes directly to societal violence as well as mental and physical health challenges, including suicide, forcing them outside of the community of moral obligation if they fail to conform to the norms. That's pretty good.
Before cross, can you send me the SAGE evidence about Durham? It's not in the doc.
Which evidence?
SAGE about New Orleans. Or SAGE, sorry.
The 141%.
Yeah.
I think it's in there. It might just not be. Oh yeah, it was on the bottom, so I accidentally deleted it. I'll send it right now.
Thank you.
Sorry about that.
No, you're good.
I just sent it. Let me look at it.
Not yet. Yeah.
Yeah, cross.
Yeah.
Oh, you got the first question.
Sweet. Okay. If you're a Republican, are you more likely to win a primary election if you campaign on anti-trans?
I don't see how this question is relevant.
Do you just want to answer?
I think Republicans just don't really care about the transgender community. Like, I don't
So do
think
you
that that's
think
just an issue
campaigning
to
on
care
that
about.
notion would help the Republicans win?
I just don't see how this is relevant. Like, also, like, I just don't think Republicans care a lot about the transgender community. Okay, can I have a question?
Yeah.
Okay. Let's talk about, actually, can you just explain your link?
Yeah, so what we tell you is that biometrics are being used right now in police. And although it's sort of biased right now, it's drastically improving, specifically in states with regulation. And they also, that's really important because crime has decreased 40% in areas with biometric use, and response times have gone up 35%. So then we have two links. First is deterrence. It's talking about because of all the lawsuits and violations that companies can have, it prevents them from actually abusing data. And then the second link is talking about visibility, and it's saying that police need to gain warrants to use biometric data to arrest people, and that solves for like discriminatory things.
Wait, but what does any of this have to do with, like, banning the technology?
Yeah, so we're saying that instead of banning it, because it's more probable right now, because it's happening, we should regulate it.
Do you have any evidence that says because we ban it, we can't regulate it?
If you don't use biometrics at all,
Wait, no,
how
but
would
like,
you regulate that?
there are states in which they ban government use of technology, but then make exemptions through regulation.
What's those states?
Like Vermont. Vermont banned government use of like biometrics, but then made an exemption for like sex trafficking. Which you can technology, but
Wait, like that's just like, why would you ban it if you can just regulate it in the first place?
because
Do
you
mind if
ban
I
it
have
and
a
it's
question?
okay, sure.
Sweet. So let's talk about. Okay. How would you define erasure?
Like you're forced to conform to societal standards instead of like actually identifying with the identity that you like truly
So
believe in.
just to be clear, like your argument is like basically like transgender people won't be able to like feel like they have an identity, right?
Yeah, they won't be able to feel like that, and like in society, they just like can't identify as like, 'cause in the society with biometrics, it's like binary, right?
Okay, sweet.
What are your two like links? Can you explain your first link?
Yeah, so our first thing is about deterrence. It says that if regulation policies go into place and companies know that they're super vulnerable to these lawsuits. For example, Google and Facebook are already like toning down their facial recognition right now. That means there's going to be less infringements on privacy and data abuse. The second link is visibility. That's talking all about policing, and it says that in states with regulation, police have to gain warrants to access biometric data services. So then, like, that means they have to have an actual reason to start an arrest in order to gain access to the biometric data to solidify the
Has
arrest.
this passed anywhere?
Yeah, Pennsylvania and Virginia.
Okay. You got it. Or-
Yeah.
Okay. That was okay.
Okay, I think I'm good. The order is going to be first on the framework, then like a really brief overview, and then down to this.
Framework, I'm sorry, overviews on verification.
Yeah,
methods.
on there, like top. Yeah. There. Okay. I'm going to start now. Let's start on the structural violence framework. We agree to it, but we say we solve better. Because what we do is through income inequality target the actual root cause of structural violence. According to Campbell University 17, structural violence is the result of societal systems such as social stratification. Systems that create situations where people don't have access to the things required to fulfill their basic human needs. So at best, we'd say that they solve for the impacts of structural violence, whereas the only actual solvency for structural violence is solving for income inequality first, and that's why you're always going to be looking to the neg before you look to the app. First, I'll have a brief overview on their case. We would say regulation solves every single problem that they advocate for, because at the end of the day, their entire case is predicated on cops using biometrics correctly. However, through deterrence and through greater visibility, we say regulation solves. But let's go on to their case. First, on the internal link of racial bias, 3 responses. First, you can delink it as regulation will solve the issue. HHR 23 writes that Congress is threatening to regulate private biometric data collection, causing the private sector to regulate themselves, creating opt-out policies for fingerprint data and tracking. Second, turn the argument as regulation will be successful in solving the issue. As Ritter 20 writes that many facial recognition technologies are successfully managing bias. According to CS22, he finds the most recent 150 algorithms are over 99% accurate across black male, black female, and white female demographics. But third, turn the argument again as biometric data helps fight systemic racism. As in order to understand the root cause of systemic racism, we need to collect, organize, and analyze large amounts of data that vary across rates and find the trends holding minorities back in this country. Biometric data collection facilitates this goal. But then they read you this card about how biometrics are 100 times more likely to misidentify black faces. Realize this evidence is literally from the application of biometric technology in Somalia. We'd say that you're going to prefer our evidence because it's actually specific to the United States. But now let's talk about over-policing altogether. 3 responses. First, you can delink it, as predictive policing is non-unique. Smith 18 writes that the ideology of increasing police presence to combat crime can be dated back to 1968, long before biometric technology. Therefore, with or without biometrics, the problem would exist. 2, that's really important as it proves the only way to fix the problem of over-policing is with biometrics. Turn the argument, as Ritter 20 explains that the only reason why biometric data skews against people of color is because the training data for artificial intelligence models are predominantly white males. Biometrics give these algorithms more diverse training data, meaning it will solve back for racism by itself. And 3, at the end of the day, remember you're trying to solve for the root cause of systemic violence, which is only on the neg world. Now let's talk about their second contention on state control. First on black activism. We would say in order to win this subpoint, they need to win C1, right? Because they need to win the internal link of racial bias, so they can't go for this subpoint if they don't go for their first contention. But even then, we would say that they aren't winning because like 2023 has the most movements ever. Look to BLM, look at these like rights marches for our lives, and this all happened after the implementation of biometrics. Obviously, the link just isn't true. But even then, we'd say income inequality is a prerequisite before you're able to attend these social movements, because having a safety net means you don't have to work 4 jobs, meaning that you can actually advocate for your rights. But now let's talk about trans erasure. 2 responses on the top. First off, it's incredibly insensitive. Their entire argument implies that trans people have to be reaffirmed by the same institution that oppressed them. They're targeting a symptom of the institution rather than targeting the root cause of oppression. The impact is complacency. When people only seek to treat the symptoms of oppression rather than the underlying cause of it, it leads to a false sense of success that actually entrenches the struggle of LGBTQ people. Their advocacy does more harm than good. But then their Lemkin evidence puts them in a double mind, as the author writes that the anti-trans hostility in the U.S. has become a staple of the Republican Party strategy. That's the exact opposite of erasure, which is defined as the tendency to ignore, deny, or minimize the existence of transgender people. But perversely, it has instead transformed the trans community, as Pharaoh 2019 consent that is beyond debate that trans people are now a part of the collective socio-political landscape. safety, but then realized that if we get rid of biometrics, the alternative is worse, as TSA agents would just be in charge of identification, as their own Quran evidence indicates, and fourthly, we say we solve as having more data solves back for the misidentification of trans people.
Can I see the first response about insensitivity on C2 7.8?
Yeah, I mean, that was just analytic, but I can show you what.
Yeah, can I see the rhetoric?
Yeah, yeah.
Or,
Do you just want to see it, or do you want me to say it?
email setting.
Okay. I just.
Alright, I just got it. We can start prep for rebuttal. Okay, cross prep. Can you also send me the Republicans' response?
Yeah. I can send it.
Alright.
Wait, how much prep was that? Sorry.
That was 114, and we'll use some more when we get it.
Okay. Yeah, okay.
Alright. Okay, I got it. Resume prep now. Okay, so that was 139 total, so we have 1.1 remaining. Is yeah, everyone right?
Where's it going to start?
Arcades. Yeah, it'll be front running staircase. Shouldn't be too fast. I can set anything afterwards. Yeah, I'm gonna start now. Starting first response, they say that they can solve better, but we prioritize it because the police force and suppression is neglected. Has historically relegated millions of people to a second-class citizenship in the United States, which matters more than income inequality, as income inequality is a system, or is a fraction of that system of oppression. Second, they say regulation solves. Every single time they say this, it's just a cross-application of their case. They want to read you this term that regulation solves specifically. Remember, it's application, not accuracy. They can see the evidence that we're going to apply these technologies in a way that that greatly disadvantages people of color and poor communities, which means that even if regulation can maybe make it better, that doesn't matter because it's how we're using it, not how accurate it is. Then they want to try and tell you that it's going to fight racism. Collecting data isn't what we're doing. We're not going to collect data and make the system more accurate. We're going to use it to punish people of color in these communities and catch them for minor crimes that they shouldn't be getting caught for, and that's going to create systems of oppression that last for generations. Then they want to try and tell you that evidence is reality, sure, its application, not accuracy, it doesn't matter anyway. They want to say that prohibition policing is not unique. Don't give in the most efficient tool of oppression ever to a broken system. It's just going to make it more broken, even if it's not unique. It's objectively worse in our world because we are increasing the scope of police oppression. Then they want to try and tell you that, like, application, not accuracy on the last two responses. On state control, first they say we need to win C1. First, we're winning it. Second, if biometrics exist, it's such only effect created by those in the first place, not necessarily the application that deters protest. That goes concede. Secondly, they concede our uniqueness that movements are already going down right now and failing, which means that it doesn't matter if biometrics are getting better and that there's protests right now, that they're already failing because of biometrics. Third, they just want to say that that biometrics are good. Remember, they're creating generational poverty. They can see the impact evidence on the C1 that's currently generating a racial caste system that disenfranchises Americans. Next, on gender discrimination, they say we're insensitive, saying that the system is bad, so that we shouldn't give the system more power isn't insensitive. We're saying that something is bad right now, we shouldn't make it worse. They don't provide any actual solvency, so the term has zero impact, zero weighing, zero information you can never vote on it. Second, they want to say that anti-trans legislation spurs, they're basically trying to tell you that oppression is good because it's getting people to vote. Never vote on that argument. The evidence is really weird. Second, biometrics, remember the oldest words. They can see the corral evidence that biometrics are always a binary system, so even if they get better, it doesn't matter insofar as the alternative is always not a binary system, and in a binary system, only two examples exist, whether or not it's better, which means that anyone in between is inherently excluded by society. That also takes the response. On the uniqueness, crime is down. SD 23 finds that there are 2,201 prisons in jail with 500% increase over the last 4 years, and facial recognition is almost always used for minor petty crimes, meaning that the neck gets all. This goes conceded out of cases out for 20 years. The facial recognition is more frequently used for low-level offenses for everything. Shockingly, police have more frequently used the technology for petty thefts and dangerous crimes. On both links, self-regulation by a broken system creates broken outcomes. The government has tried police reform before, tried to restrict patriots that how this has been abused for the worst. The only solution to the oppression of biometrics on the app is to ban all biometric data collection. None of this regulation is enough, especially the way it is now. Tier 1s from Lead 22 broken these first state and local regulations lack uniformity throughout the country, and the majority of municipalities do not have specific legal restrictions on government use of facial recognition. In the absence of a nationwide comprehensive data transfer, data and privacy law, companies face few legal limitations on how they can collect, process, and transfer information. Gaps in current federal and state privacy laws mean that their actions to collect, use, and trade data often go unchallenged. Second, no matter whether there's a federal ban, it's the only thing we can do to solve the issue, because otherwise states control their own policing laws. Lead continues that because Congress and the because state and local governments have jurisdiction over policing their areas, Congress and the federal branch of the federal executive branch have limited means to improve policing practice elsewhere in the United States. Durham terms specifically, voluntary and highly selective corporate moratoriums are insufficient to protect privacy since they do not stop government agencies from doing facial recognition offered from other private companies. The number of prominent companies have not taken this pledge or continue to either enable or allow scrapping of photos for third-party data recognition basis. Remember, on their link about deterrence, it's not going to function as defense on our case because everything we're talking about is misused by the government, not misused by private corporations, which means that even if private corporations are self-regulating, and even if it's working, it can't apply as defense in their case, since they don't read an impact specifically off this link, you can never be voted on the second link. Don't fool yourself. The cops don't play by the rules and conform to regulations. Otherwise, the killing of unarmed civilians and no knock warrants, turning off body cams wouldn't happen. The cops aren't playing by the rules. Regulation isn't working. We shouldn't just vote for a broken system, which is what you do in even. Wait, girls.
Wait, did you say you sent that?
I can.
Yeah,
You-
can you?
Yeah. It's all over the rhetoric. Do you want the evidence I heard too?
Yeah, I want
Cool. Rhetoric on top. Evidence on bottom. So I need SP. Alright, this is the evidence. This is really wrong.
no worries.
But So whenever you get there, you're ready for us.
Yeah. I'm going to take the first question.
Not all.
Oh, sorry. We can wait for it.
So I just have.
Okay.
Yeah, I got it too.
You mind if I take the first question?
Not all.
Okay. So why have biometrics historically been inaccurate?
Like historically inaccurate because they're using racialized data sets that inaccurately identify gender minorities and people of color. Can I take the question?
Well, so then isn't the natural follow-up that like improving the data set would therefore solve that bias?
Yeah, but you've conceded the evidence out of case that's not accuracy, it's application. Even if these technologies can 100% identify like people of color, gender minorities in America, it's only going to be used to like punish them and abuse their rights, not actually create any positive change. So accuracy doesn't matter, it's how we use it. Can I take the question?
Sure.
Talk a bit about your case. One of these like regulations on police officers ever done anything good?
Yeah, so we'd say these regulations are super specific because they're not just like blatant laws. For one, deterrence means that they actually are going to be effective because if a cop breaks these laws, they're like subject to actually being pursued.
Yeah. Right now, like if a cop kills an unarmed black man in America, they get weeks of vacation, and the criminal justice system rarely ever does anything.
We'd
So
say
what
that's
changes
substantially
with this
different. There's no law that says like a cop can't kill an unarmed black man. This is really specific.
I mean,
It's saying a
there's
cop.
laws against murder.
Yeah, sure, but we'd say this evidence is like really specific and saying you literally don't get to access biometric data until you have a warrant. And if you misuse that biometric data, you're subject to being sued.
Oh, cool. But how do just a quick follow-up, how do we prevent people from misusing this data?
Well, so for one, we'd say just increasing accuracy, right? Because as soon as like you increase accuracy, it's really hard to like use maliciously because literally all you're doing is just identifying a person. But then like beyond that, we'd say just regulating it and making it so that it can't be used like in corrupt means. Because if they use it in corrupt means, then it could be like sued against them.
But
you get rid of all the negative benefits while maintaining the positives of like stopping crime.
And just like that doesn't really answer the question, right? Is there like some kind of regulatory oversight that prevents cops from abusing this data?
Yeah, so like look to our first link, it's literally the entire judicial system. Look to our second link where we'd say it's like other police officers.
Cool. And has this ever stopped the police?
I mean,
before?
can I take a question?
Sure.
Okay. Didn't the BLM movement start while biometrics were in effect by the police?
Yeah, and you can see the
Okay.
uniqueness out of our case that that movement is failing and legislation
Sure,
isn't
but-
happening right now because of biometrics.
Couldn't it just be like failing for other reasons? Like if it literally started and gained so much traction while biometrics are being used and then just inevitably petered out, like isn't that
I
more
mean,
likely?
our evidence is pretty specific. Sure, movements rise and like fall, but like what we're specifically telling you is that like the main reason it's failing right now, one of the primary reasons, is because of biometric technology. Can I take a question?
Yeah.
Talk a little bit more about your case. So, how is corporate regulation, per your first link on deterrence, going to change anything about what the government does?
Because who collects data? Is like Joe Biden
I mean,
going out with his cameras and
right,
people?
but
No, it's private corporations.
If we give the cops a massive facial recognition tower, they're going to collect their own data sets. So, how does private companies'
not true.
regulation affect that?
What? Wait, like so cops are gonna have to go out and start like fingerprinting people on the street?
Yeah, like that's what the cops do. They already have a massive fingerprint databases from like
Yeah.
people who have been like sent to prison.
Well, so for one, we would say that they get a bunch of data from private corporations, but two, we'd say literally all these same regulations also apply to cops.
But your evidence is private corporations regulating themselves with zero mentions of cops. It's like
Yeah,
you
so
can't just
that-
make the connection that's going to apply to cops.
Yeah, so that's the
the
uniqueness, but the link is saying that these regulations spill over into like federal regulations. Oh, we'll take some credit.
Wait, can we pause one first?
Sure.
What was the card that says that like biometrics aren't actually creating data to trick algorithms?
Did I read that?
You gave that response.
Oh yeah, that was an analytical. It was just like based on evidence from our case. We're not using the biometrics to collect data. We're using it to like punish people.
So, where's your stuff?
minutes. Actually.
Excellent, thank you.
Okay. Order's going to be down our case papers. The easiest place to sign your ballot is our sole contention of that the genie is out of the bottle. What we tell you is that biometric usage is actually increasing right now. They try to respond to this telling you that crime is not down. That's not our uniqueness. That's not what we're discussing. But even if you do buy that, that's not talking about these states that have already imposed regulation. In those states, crime is down. We're winning that argument super cleanly. Then they try to tell you it's only petty crimes, but they can see the analysis on New Orleans, which told you that when New Orleans rolled out a biometric ban, homicides increased 141%. I'd say that's absolutely not a petty crime, but secondly, crime is crime. Either way, like, solving crime is good. But then they tell you that police reform has never worked in the past. Yes, but regulation is the only path to solvency. Banning will literally do nothing. If it hasn't worked for 50 years, why would going back to the same decade that it never worked in do anything for these causes? Rather prefer regulation. To the extent where they drop the entirety of our second link that tells you about visibility and warranting, it's very clean. What we tell you is regulation is the only path to solvency because it forces police to gain actual warrants about what arrests they're making prior to accessing the biometric data. That means it doesn't even matter if you buy the racial bias argument because either way they need to prove that they're arresting someone with a valid reason. Therefore, as soon as they concede that link, they also concede our impact is super fair. What we tell you is that when crime increases, so does income inequality, and that's really detrimental because, for example, when we cut income inequality by 7%, increased it by 7%, it put 3.2 million people into poverty. Additionally, they conceded the prereq out of rebuttal. That was very clear. It tells you that when income inequality continues to exacerbate, it fundamentally increases the dire situations of all of these people they're so desperately trying to advocate for. That means if you solve this, it prevents the need for more social movements, it prevents the need for more crime in general, and it prevents the need for any cop regulation. But then let's move on to their case. There's a lot of things they draw. First, once again, remember the analysis that Alex gives you. They're only solving the symptoms, not the root cause. However, regulation does the exact opposite, and it addresses the problem in the root by solving income inequality. That's the best path to solvency. You're voting there for the net. But then they tell you that it's application, not the data. However, reg implies that app and accuracy with the warrant application. So therefore, if the application is the problem, having a warrant and reforming the application is the only way to fix that. You'll be voting neg there. But then they can see the turn very cleanly that tells you that biometric, based on the analysis of the top 150 algorithms of 2022, they're 99% accurate. It's not racially biased. But then let's move on to their contention too of state control. Remember what we tell you that biometric training increases, remember that what we tell you is that 2023 is a high for social movements. For example, Black Lives Matter and March for Your Lives. They'll tell you movements going down, maybe, but like either way, it's not because of surveillance. But then either way, they can see the prereq, that kicks us out of that entire argument. On subpoint B of trans rights, remember the term. Their whole argument is that trans rights have to be discussed in order to maintain them on top. However, that is entirely non-unique because Republicans will always campaign on it. They're not just going to get erased. But secondly, that's
we have, what, 121 rep left? Start running that.
Everyone ready?
Yeah.
I just said that. Your voting for us on gender securitization is simple. Biometrics are, and the increasing use of gender recognition technology are a tool of like cis-normative society designed to appear benign, inconsequential, yet solidify and definitionally operate under the view that gender is binary and to ensure that individual identities remain constant for secure identification and control. This forces an impossible choice for trans people. Either they conform to their original gender to fit the needs of cis-normative algorithms, which are incapable of dealing with their identities, or be excluded from the system and society, be controlled with biometrics, and enhance massive power for the government to inevitably surveil queer populations and control their every action and target discrimination. This is systemically erasing trans people from society and implicitly instilling the idea that they do not belong by denying them access to everyday system control of biometrics, creating huge psychological harm to us and removing any moral imperative to treat them as human. The one single response they extend in summary is that Republicans will always campaign on it. A, this is all over time, you don't evaluate it, and B, this doesn't interact with the case. Our case is that biometric data is in everyday society and permeates everything you do from travel to accessing infrastructure and everything you do. Republicans campaigning on it doesn't restrict trans people access to any of these things that biometric data control. And Republicans campaigning on it always have the Democrats always pushing against it. But if it's biometric data that controls that already permeates society as a whole, that means that trans people can't get access to all of these infrastructure, and that's the impact. Their defense doesn't interact with this. At that point, we're winning case very cleanly. We look at the weighing. Prioritize structural violence. They've conceded the emergent evidence, which finds that traditional risk calculus is racist and opposed to catastrophes, which means we are unable to address structural violence. The internal link they read that they want to get you to vote off of is that race inequality causes economic downfall, and then which economic downfall causes racial inequality. But economic downfall is probably a big catastrophe that the U.S. government is always focused on, and insofar as statutes. There's always going to be people focusing on preserving the economy versus preserving the trans community. At that point, you can the weighing is solvent. There's people always looking for the impacts, no one's looking for ours. The offense and weighing is clean. Look at their case. On their case, they concede a piece of defense that Jack reads that fundamentally loses at the ground. Jack tells you that regulation doesn't work because cops don't play by the rules. The link that they extend is that cops have to use warrants to access data, but what they ignore is what Jack tells you. The hinted evidence tells you that cops perpetuate a racial caste system in which all the cops are already racist and don't care about any of the regulation, which is why empirically right now you see cops already turning off things like body cams and not conforming to any of the regulation. That's the defense that Jack argued that when conceded. Insofar as that's true, and no regulation works, and it's empirically true. That they don't get access to their impacts. It's pretty clear for you. Or not. Yeah, that's fine.
Y'all ready for granted?
Yeah.
Cool. Time to start your first question.
I'll take it. Okay. Oh, what's the solvency for trans erasure?
Yeah, what we're telling you is that in a world with biometrics, it's a binary. You are either male or you are female.
Right.
That leaves out everyone in between. And we're saying that you shouldn't perpetuate a system of violence that is designed to address.
That's not what I'm talking about. I'm talking about trans erasure. Right, and at that point, you have to prove that people believe that they're being ousted from society solely for their gender orientation. I don't understand how that happens because the technology says there are two.
Well, here's what the technology does, right? That technology is used by companies like Uber to verify a driver's identity. When that technology says you're either female, if you are anywhere in between, if you are transgender and the machine doesn't recognize you as your preferred gender, guess what? You're not allowed to drive because the machine tells you you can't. That's the big problem because when all of our technology is based on a binary and people don't fit that binary,
Sure.
they are removed from society.
Uber is a biometric, right?
Uber is using biometrics to verify driver identities. That's besides the point. When everything in society runs on biometrics and you're told you're either this or that, and when someone decides that they don't want to be either or that they want to change, the biometrics don't recognize that and they're ousted from society. Can we take a question? If cops don't play by the rules, how is regulation going to fix anything?
Yeah, so thanks for asking that. Our evidence is super specific in indicating that cops literally don't have access to biometric data until they have a warrant. At that point, they literally can't abuse it because it's not like they're pulling out a taser or something. They're trying to get access to something that they can't physically access.
Who is keeping this data? Where is it stored? Police record systems?
Probably not police record systems, but
Well, then where
I mean,
would
to
they
the
store
extent where you cold concede the entire link that's saying that they have to have a warrant, bringing up this response of where the data is stored, either A, even if it's stored in the police database, they still need a warrant, that doesn't change anything.
but also like this is entirely new.
Yeah, okay.
Can I have a question?
Kind of just really quick to respond.
Just really quick.
Okay. First of all, this is all really like pretty cool analysis. Probably should have been in summary. And second of all,
That's the entire argument.
you just like didn't respond to like the cops like not playing by the rules in summary. But second of all, insofar as you still conceded Hinton, which finds that the system of police itself is still racist, they're not going to conform by the rules because the people who enforce the rules are still also racist. Insofar as that's true, like they're still going to allow all of these things to happen because they want it to happen, which is why it's empirically happening now.
Okay, sweet. Do you mind if I have a question?
Sure.
Okay, so why do trans people have to be like reaffirmed in society, right? Because if we like sit here in this debate and like entrench that their struggles are like going to be solved by banning biometrics, like isn't that like inherently complacent and definitely like bad?
Like our argument isn't anything about. It's like our argument is that we shouldn't just tell trans people that they can't exist. We shouldn't tell trans people that they're either one or the other and they can't change. We shouldn't tell non-binary people that they cannot be who they want to be and have to fit one of these two systems. Like we're not necessarily arguing for the reaffirmation of identities. We're just saying that people have a right to exist in society and be recognized as who they are. I don't know how in any world that doesn't exist.
We have like a minute 25. So that's the last one. We're just going to be going over the major voting issues in the round, starting with framing. Start on the framing debate. Both sides are solving for structural violence, but what's really crucial is when they concede that income inequality has to come first in structural violence. It serves as a pre-rank. This is for two reasons. First off, remember the analysis they never respond to is as soon as like you have income and you are in dire poverty, that's when you're able to campaign for your rights. However, as soon as you're entrenched by society, by income inequality, you're unable to actually advocate for social change. But the second reason is because income inequality is the basis for structural violence, and that's what our evidence specifically indicates, that income inequality was the thing that started structural violence. So at best, they solve for the symptoms of structural violence, but in our world, we solve for the actual root cause. When you're weighing structural violence, you can't just like marginally benefit people who experience that violence. You have to solve for the root cause of that violence because that's the only solvency in the long term. They give you one response here. They say that like the U.S. is always focused on stopping income inequality. No one's helping trans people. First off, that's brand new in second summary. We say don't evaluate it. But secondly, we've seen that the United States has literally never stopped income inequality. It's still getting worse than the status quo. Obviously, they're not benefiting these people. At that point, you're immediately looking to our case first because income inequality has to come first. And the easiest place to vote in this round is on our sole contention about how the genie is already out of the law. Remember our second link on visibility. As biometrics are being used more, regulations are going into place. Look to Virginia, look to Pennsylvania, and look to bills that are already on the docket, such as the Online Data Federal Privacy Act, that are advocating that warrants must be used before cops have access to biometric data. They give you one response. They say cops don't play by the rules. First off, this isn't parted, and even if it is, it's not specific. We tell you call for Claypool 20, call for Lively 21. It's all super specific and indicating that cops literally can't access this biometric data until they have a specific warrant. The impact of income inequality, besides solving for structural violence, is also reducing poverty, as a 7% reduction in inequality leads to 3.2 million people being brought out of poverty. But on their case, realize that their entire impact is just about it's about trans visibility. It's not about discrimination. So to the point where like policies being enacted lead to discussion about trans people that reaffirms their identity and reaffirms their position in society. So rather than like this discrimination having adverse effects, or rather than these policies having adverse effects, it leads to talking about these people, which then reduces the risk of erasure. For all these reasons, vote to end structural violence.
Okay. Is everyone ready? Cool.
Yeah.
Yeah, our case, their case. Weighing when I weigh. Starting our case, extend gender securitization, biometrics, and the increasing use of gender recognition technology or towards normative society designed to appear benign and inconsequential, yet strongly solidify the view that gender is binary and unchanging in order to ensure individual identities remain constant for secure identification and control. This forces an impossible choice for trans people. Either they conform to their original gender and fit the needs of cis-normative algorithms, which aren't capable of dealing with their identities, or be excluded from the systems in society being controlled by biometrics, enhance massive power for the government to inevitably surveil queer populations and control their every action and target discrimination through policy. This is systematically erasing trans people from society, implicitly instilling the idea that they do not belong by denying them access to everyday systems controlled by biometrics, creating huge psychological harm, suicide, and removing any moral imperative to treat them as human. They make one response, and it's that oppression is good because it makes people talk about it. We shouldn't be advocating for a system of oppression just because it makes people talk about and consider trans issues. That's really stupid, and it's also all over time. It's a really bad argument. Even then, remember, we both can see the framing, which says you need to evaluate structural violence first, and we are clearly looking into structural violence because it's violence by the government against an oppressed community in America. On their case, they concede out of summary that cops don't play by the rules and don't respond to it. They bring up this new response that's not carded. Literally every piece of it, it's very common knowledge that police don't always get a warrant, turn off their body cams, and kill unarmed civilians. And remember what Caleb told you, Incident 21 finds that police force want to design a racial caste system designed to oppress every single minority in America, which means that they will oppress just for the sake of oppression, even if it means violating them on some certain circumstances, which is what they've already done. They also don't read an internal link into income inequality. They just say the police are going to be regulated in their final focus. They don't tell you a reason why this is going to reduce income inequality, which is that one, they can't access the prereq, and two, they don't have any access to the structural violence wing. Even though in the structural violence wing, remember, income inequality cannot possibly solve for gender nonconforming individuals because gender nonconforming individuals aren't just confined to an economic class. They're people who can exist anywhere on the economic spectrum, meaning that income inequality doesn't fundamentally solve for issues. And secondly, they have no solvency because they don't extend an internal link. At that point, the weighing is really easy. We both concede that structural violence comes first. We're the only one with an internal link. And, yeah, that's fine.